Welcome to the Ordinals Podcast, produced by Ord Media, featuring the top builders, projects, and investors pioneering Bitcoin inscription protocols and the future of digital artifacts.
Welcome, everyone, to the Ordinals Podcast. I'm your host, Ragnar Lifthrasir. Today is going to be a very high brain activity podcast. Today, we're very lucky to have Ordinally with us. Ordinally, welcome to the Ordinals Podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. Great to be here.
Absolutely. Appreciate your time. Today's episode, we want to help people understand the heart of Ordinals, and so much is run by the GitHub and ordinals.com. And it's kind of a black box to a lot of people, especially if they're not technical. That GitHub and the repo and everything that goes down there, the governance, the code, the conversations, the pull requests, everything. There's so much going on there. And I think a lot of non-technical users don't fully understand. And because Ordinals is so new and so much to fix and upgrade and maintain, I want to kind of demystify that. And you are one of the perfect people to do so. So before we dive in too deep, tell us about how you got started in Ordinals and when you got started.
Yeah, so it was all kind of serendipity played a large role here. It actually started in Texas about a year ago, end of August last year, at the BitBlock Boom conference. I was introduced to Casey there, and he started kind of 1 minute into the conversation, he started talking about ordinals, and was kind of explaining this protocol he had been working on to essentially number individual satoshis. And kind of the first few minutes I thought, okay, so what's going on here? Like this guy sounds like really convinced of what he's doing, but this could also be just a bit of a crazy person. But we ended up having, I think, like a 2-hour, pretty deep discussion. I was asking a lot of questions, and kind of the deeper we went into the conversation, the more fascinating I found the concept, because what was interesting was that, kind of in my journey into Bitcoin, kind of in the very beginning when I got there, what interested me about Bitcoin was like this concept of digital scarcity, and how can you get scarcity in a world where you can copy everything, like, you can make infinite copies of everything. So understanding like, proof of work, and, how is the supply cap actually enforced, and how does that work? And kind of in my mental model for understanding the transaction model in Bitcoin, I had kind of in my head also had these pictures of, kind of little units of Bitcoin kind of flowing from the inputs to the outputs, and kind of had thought about like, well, maybe you could actually track them. And then, then essentially you can make sure that you never have more than 21 million Bitcoin or 2.1 quadrillion Satoshis. But Casey had kind of taken that to a level where he had actually kind of thought the whole system through, like the exact numbering, and he had built software to actually track that. So as serendipity works, like we also figured out, oh, we're both flying to San Francisco the next day, so let's meet up again and dive a little deeper. And he kind of helped me get his implementation Ord running on my laptop. And because I was curious about, okay, so there's also this idea he had about, having uncommon Satoshis and having rare Satoshis. And I thought, it would be interesting to see what I have in my, in my kind of Bitcoin stack. Is there anything interesting there? So I wanted to get the software running. And that essentially kind of started my trip down the Ordinals and Ord rabbit hole, because getting the software up and running was, I think the indexing run took like a good week on my laptop. And after that I found, I think I actually found 2 uncommon Satoshis, and was very happy about that back in September last year. but I also thought, okay, so the software is nice, but it's a little slow. So, and that was something that kind of piqued my interest. And Casey at the time was doing, I think, first weekly and then like daily Twitter spaces and then Discord sessions where he was, essentially programming kind of with screen sharing and kind of showing his code base and helping people who had questions on the implementation. And so I started joining those and, had my questions and then started working on making the indexing faster. That was kind of my first, like, whatever, a little bit bigger project in there. And yeah, that's kind of the start of my journey. That was August, September last year.
September of last year. So BitBlock Boom is where you met Casey. That's a Bitcoin Maximalist conference, definitely. And obviously Casey, obviously Casey is a Bitcoin maximalist, right? And so that is serendipitous, and it's funny because I was talking to Erin Redwing about how she met Casey and got involved in Ordinals. And like, I think if she didn't use the word serendipity, it was something like that, where she just thought it was a strange, like kind of coincidence. And she thought it was like kind of a good time. So it sounds like something similar with you. So you got involved like July, August of last year, started running it, found some Satoshis. And then that was then. So then walk me through that to say December, because it seemed like December is when Casey, really started to publish and said, hey, this is kind of a product ready to go and launch, really. So what walk me through like July to December of last year. What were you doing?
Yeah. So my journey started end of August. I think Casey had started like roughly in, I don't know the exact date, but I think in spring last year. So he had maybe started in whatever, January, February, March, and he had a student working with him, Liam, all the way till July, and then Raf also started, I think, August, September. So at that time, like these, like my involvement in Ordinals kind of from September to December essentially really was these sometimes daily sessions in Discord. We would meet at 10 a.m. Pacific, and then kind of, which is very conveniently kind of my evening, kind of after work, and I had an interest like kind of in my like I had an interest, like one of the intentions I had for last year was to get back to more hands-on technical work. I'm a software engineer by education, but kind of my time of actively kind of developing code every day, is a few years behind me, and I really had an interest to kind of contribute to an open source project that was Bitcoin related. Like that was very specifically at the beginning of the year kind of my intention, and wanted to kind of really get my hands dirty, as you say, on some code and something that's interesting. And I had been kind of looking at a lot of things throughout the year, but this code base like was the first time I thought, okay, this is interesting. It's Bitcoin. Casey is like a really, really good kind of educator and teacher. So these I found this on the web these Discord, this is interesting. These Discord sessions for me really were like also kind of really helping me to get into this programming language that Ord uses, Rust, which is one I hadn't used before. I'm kind of fluent in I think a good handful of programming languages, but Rust wasn't one of them. Rust isn't the easiest one to pick up. It has it has a lot of great properties, but being easy to learn is not one of them. I find it fairly easy to read after a while, but it's kind of harder to write. So it was great kind of learning from Casey, and he has some really good practices in that code base, like having everything is kind of very well tested with automated tests on different levels. We have unit tests, we have integration tests. A lot of work has gone into actually building a complete mock Bitcoin core implementation so that you can run kind of full tests of all the complicated stuff that Ord does without touching, an actual blockchain. So there were a lot of things there that really interested me from a kind of just how do you set up a good, open source project that is also, where people can contribute, but you have kind of safeguards in place not to break things, right? I mean, in the end, like Ord has a wallet, for example, that is dealing with actual Bitcoin, and you don't want there to be bugs in there that accidentally spend users' funds or things like that. So it's kind of high stakes in a way, and I really like these practices he had. So kind of, yeah, September to December were really like this kind of very small kind of, I think my calendar invite that I had from Casey was called Ordinals Coding Club. And that's what it felt like. It felt like a small club where we typically had 2 or 3 people show up, sometimes 4. And, we were talking about technical topics. We were looking at code that other people had written. I was actually learning a lot the first few weeks from just watching Casey kind of pair program with Raf, and kind of really picking up. Okay, this is how he thinks about the code base. This is how he does testing. This is how Rust works. This is how this is organized. So for me, it was like a very kind of customized, kind of actually a way to learn Rust and this code base. But it at no point did it feel like, oh, we're building something that many people will be interested in. To me, it really felt like, okay, this is a bit of a niche project that is technically very interesting, but I had no expectation whatsoever that kind of we would have the take up and the adoption that we have seen since January.
So for you, it's definitely a passion project, intellectually stimulating. You obviously love Bitcoin if you want to do this much hard work and programming really in the weeds of Rust and everything else. And you brought up some interesting points about, so like with Casey, obviously, I think we all would agree that Ordinals is, a really great framework and really great work. But so Casey's not just that, but he's also a good educator. He's a good speaker. He set up these best practices. He's not perfect, but I think the people that I've spoken to who really have experience with this sort of thing said, actually, this is set up pretty well in how we develop things. And you said like people can contribute, but there's also like rails in place. It's just like not disorganized. So it's kind of a beautiful thing in the sense that it's an open source project, but didn't have too much like bad disorganization and infighting. It sounds like, talking with you and a couple other people, that you guys were a relatively, cohesive group that was very intellectually stimulated and loved working on Bitcoin. Does that sound about right?
Which is very easy also in a kind of 3 or maximal 4-person team, right? But yeah, I mean, I think the way Casey set it up and also the way he led the project really, especially in those early days, really helped us that, it felt really cohesive. And that was also what was making it fun, right? Otherwise you could say, why would you spend your spare time on, digging into some complicated kind of brain-breaking Rust code, when you could also, whatever, do something that maybe sounds more fun. But for me, it really was like my learning, like for me, a good measure of, is this something interesting for me is always kind of my rate of learning. And if, that time felt like, hey, I'm learning a lot and that's great. So that was my main measure of success. Like how much can I learn here? Can I pick up, kind of the technical skills I wanted? I could learn much more deeply about Bitcoin. I learned much more about like the ins and outs of Taproot transactions, which I hadn't dug into at all before. Kind of constructing, custom transactions in with TypeScript, stuff like that. Like that's something I had no experience with before, and that really was my kind of main metric for success. The interesting thing is like the first 2 months, I think, there weren't any inscriptions. Like this was just about, I mean, imagine, right? This was just about building a protocol that allowed you to track Satoshis with no.
That's true. Yeah, that's right.
With no use case of inscribing something and then, kind of using the ordinals to track those inscriptions.
Yeah.
The inscriptions were only added. I remember, like, I met Casey a second time than last year in person at Pacific Bitcoin. It was, I think, in November, and there we were talking about, like, okay, so how could we do like the sandbox model for these inscriptions, and we were actually having some technical discussions on how that could do, but like, I was never so interested in the inscription part, interestingly, in the beginning, because I thought, yeah, okay, I mean, that's okay, that's a nice kind of extra. You can store some data there, but like, I had never been into, into NFTs or any of that stuff. But what I did find interesting was kind of Casey's vision of, well, this is like, given the nature of the Bitcoin blockchain, I think this is a way to store data with like a really kind of low time preference, kind of long-term view. And that I found interesting, right? Because I am interested in art and kind of the idea of kind of preserving kind of art and, high value collectibles kind of for a long time. That I found interesting, right?
Yeah.
And
so when did inscriptions, were you guys talking about inscriptions from the beginning, or did that come later? Because people forget, like you said, it's ordinal theory is really just numbering sats. That's the foundation of it. Like, technically you don't need to inscribe anything. You can just track and find these sats. So when did when did inscriptions come up? Was that from the beginning or just later towards the end?
It came up like the vision was there from the beginning, right? So the vision was there from the beginning. In terms of implementation, I don't remember exactly when it was. I think it was mid-November, I would say, that the implementation work for inscription started. There was some pretty artist technical work that Casey wanted to do before, which was writing this kind of mock Bitcoin core implementation to be able to test these things. And Raf was very heavily working on that at the time. I think I was busy with some other stuff at the time, so I wasn't as deeply involved during that time in November. But then I think it started mid-November, and then December 14th, I think, was when Casey tested the first mainnet inscription, the famous inscription number 0. And so that's when that was possible. I think Signet inscriptions we officially released, I think, at that time. But of course, it was easy. Like, people very quickly figured out, like, okay, so you just have to uncomment a line and then you can inscribe on mainnet. So inscriptions by other people kind of popped up very quickly after Casey's first inscription.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And I want to go back to inscriptions, but first I want to go. So we'll talk about inscriptions, but I want to go back to kind of November, December, maybe October. So when you were in these doing the coding, were you contributing code to the GitHub? Were you learning about it? Like, what was your role in terms of like the code base in GitHub pre-December?
So I think overall, like, my biggest PR was this kind of indexer. I don't want to say rewrite, but I pretty much changed the made it a lot faster. Like, I think like the end-to-end change from my contributions there was from a good week down to half a day. So like a factor of 15 or so, which in my mind, okay, that made it kind of bearable. Like, half a day, that's something you can, if you don't have to do it every time, it's just a one-time cost, that's doable. And that required quite a bit of kind of rework in the indexing. And then I worked on kind of smaller PRs as well. But I think the indexing code was my biggest kind of contribution during that time. I also, like, there was a lot of kind of reviewing other people's code and things like that. But yeah, I mean, I was kind of picking up Rust and slowly started contributing myself and kind of dug into this index. So that was my main thing.
The indexing, yeah, and that's such a critical part of ordinals is proper indexing and the indexer. So that's good, and you really were doing this for the passion and the intellectual curiosity. And then December comes around, and then walk me through December, because that's when first inscription mainnet. Tell me about December, what you can, when that launched.
Yeah, so that wasn't a big launch. Like the discussion at that point was, okay, let's test it out, and kind of our assumption was that maybe if like we had a big roadmap of things that we wanted to get done before a big launch, but we were also thinking like, okay, maybe there's a handful of people interested, maybe a few dozen, and so let's kind of. I think that the decision was made in January to go for that mainnet launch end of January. There wasn't too much happening. If you look at the code base, also there was a lot of kind of preparing for like trying to find like what is the minimal set of features that needs to be done for the mainnet launch, and it was a tough. There were some tough decisions at that time, because like initially we had thought like you need to have something like a concept for provenance and parent-child inscriptions and all of that. All of that needs to be there before it can be launched. Mm-hmm. But then we also thought, well, not a lot of people will use this, so it doesn't matter. Like it's good to get feedback from a handful of people, and then then we have essentially the next few months kind of like. My expectation was this would continue at this kind of leisurely kind of, okay, every evening you can do a few hours if you want, kind of pace. But yeah.
Not so.
Reality proved it wrong. No, exactly.
Yeah. So when you guys are ready for mainnet launch, like what was this going to be? You've been working hard on this, talking about it for a while. Like what was the concept of we're going to launch this? Well, what was this thing you guys were going to launch? Was it like, oh, this is a tool to inscribe, this is a tool for NFTs, or this was a tool for tracking, Satoshis? What was this thing you guys had?
No, I mean, it was a tool for, we didn't, like, we purposely avoided the word NFT just to distinguish it from all the issues that we see in the existing NFT ecosystem. So we talked about inscriptions or digital artifacts, to really also I think that to me, like, the key property of an inscription is that the data or the art, if you inscribe art, is on chain. And with an NFT, that is not always the case, right? So or let's say that's in very many cases not the case. So we really wanted to make that distinction, and no, the idea very clearly was that this is creating a way to do something comparable maybe to NFTs but different on Bitcoin, and to get a little bit of feedback from it, but.
So it wasn't inscription from the beginning. That was a way to have data, images, files on chain, not NFTs, obviously digital artifacts. Yeah. And I think you guys and Casey were right to call it that. It definitely adds more meaning when it's an artifact versus just a file. I mean, when I think of artifact, that's something that lasts a long time. It's clearly made by humans with some purpose, and it's supposed to last a long time. Like at the Ordinals 2023 conference, my talk was about that. These are artifacts. And I asked people, what will you inscribe, right? Because just like today, archaeologists find human artifacts. One day there will be people who find these funny Satoshis with these digital artifacts. So you guys, you knew that's what it was. But now walk me through kind of mid-December to January and maybe the end of January. So it's just a group of you guys, inscribing starts. When did things hit some sort of inflection point, or when did things change? What kicked it off? Was there any specific thing, or just kind of day after day, it just sort of snowballed?
No, it's so the inflection point very clearly was like the mainnet launch January, what was it, 20 whatever, some Saturday in January 21st, I think, or 22nd. And Casey made a press release with Isabel that kind of,
Foxen, yeah.
yeah, Foxen, that resonated a lot, and that kind of, I think, kicked off a lot of things. And like, at that point, like, so the vision very clearly was like, okay, this is inscriptions, and ordinals are the way to assign ownership to these inscriptions and to be able to transfer these transfer ownership of these inscriptions. So the essential parts that you need to have non-fungible tokens, if you want. So that was the clear vision at that point. But then things started snowballing very quickly. I think the last few days of January and all of February is kind of from that perspective, a bit of a blur because it all happened so quickly. I think
so that kept you guys really busy. Then all of a sudden you had people messaging you on GitHub saying, what about
well,
this?
yeah,
What about that? I mean,
set up,
what was that like?
exactly. We had this Discord server that we had been using, essentially mainly for our coding club, right? And that GitHub server, like, I think for a few days, kind of the number of users doubled every day. I think whatever, at some point early February, it was like 20,000 people. And just from, I don't know, maybe 25, a few weeks earlier. So it just grew very quickly. And like the amount of messages there and support requests was crazy. There wasn't so much activity on GitHub at that point. It was really kind of, and that was also kind of something I hadn't, like, the amount of people who piled in that were coming, with a not very technical background, was quite overwhelming, because they, like, we had kind of naively assumed, well, this would only be interesting to Bitcoiners who maybe run a full node anyway. And, and then, our software was built in a way that, you need to have a fully synced full node with transaction indexing on, and then you need to run this indexing process for ORD. So it's a fairly technical process. And it was really amazing to see how many people kind of came in and really wanted to get this stuff working, but they didn't have like even the slightest kind of starting point in how to work with Bitcoin and kind of. So it ended up being, and it was great. Like we had very quickly great people in the community who were helping, like, these kind of newcomers. It turned out into like a massive education effort on like the basics of Bitcoin, and we were thinking, well, this is actually great. Like, we so many people being onboarded to run full Bitcoin nodes. That's amazing. That's nice. The GitHub, yes, started to be more contributions. Kind of, we did a few sessions in February. Casey did on, kind of like doing, for example, there's one session where he's kind of, I think that's even recorded, where he's going through a PR that I did and kind of walked everyone through the process of how he reviews PRs, and the PR is a pull request on GitHub. So for the less technical audience, that's essentially a submission of a change or kind of a new feature or a bug fix to our software. And PR reviews are kind of essential part of open source development, because you need, like, as the maintainer of the open source repository, once you have kind of merged code from someone, and it's essentially now it's your job to kind of maintain that, and so kind of the quality control on that side is quite important.
Well, yeah, that's interesting how many people jumped in who weren't even technical. I remember being in the Ordicord in the Discord, and people were asking, what is UTXO? And it was so amazing because I mean, right? Like, when was the last time? I don't know how long you've been in Bitcoin, but I can't remember the last time people were asking what a UTXO was. I mean, if you didn't know that, you didn't care. It was just amazing to see people learning about that because they're used to Ethereum and they have a totally different system. So you walk through that and the node. I mean, and it's even like to you, like you learned Rust. You learned more things and you're a technical person. It sounds like you've been into Bitcoin for a while. You probably knew quite a bit, but even you learned, sounds like, some new skills and some new things in Bitcoin because of Ordinals, right?
So it was like, it turned out to be this massive education kind of opportunity. And it was interesting to me because, like, I mean, you commented on BitBlock Boom being a bit of a Bitcoin Maxi conference, and I was like, I've been in Bitcoin for a few years. I think it's going on 7-8 years now, and kind of, fairly quickly kind of filtered down to, okay, there's a lot of noise out here, and I will focus really on Bitcoin and not on all this other stuff that's going on with, like, every day there's 10 new blockchains started, and I'm not interested, and because you need some sort of noise filter. And, it's not that I'm like, I think I'm quite open to like technical innovation, but my interest in even going into Bitcoin really was this idea of, like I said initially, of digital scarcity and having something that is, that is provably scarce. And I think the idea of having, I don't know, 21,000 coins on CoinMarketCap is kind of like the exact opposite of scarcity, right? It's and I had looked into Ethereum. I find the whole concept of smart contracts and like all the things you can do there, I find that interesting, but it's not like the one thing that, in my view, Ethereum doesn't do is like scarcity. Like that's just not there. But it may be useful for other things. So anyway, so I had this pretty strong Bitcoin filter on, and I wouldn't call myself a maximalist, but when I was going to conferences, I was going to like these more maxi conferences. So this also for me was interesting because suddenly I was talking to all these people from Ethereum, from other chains who were really interested suddenly in learning some basics about Bitcoin. I was thinking, okay, this is interesting. I mean, it's a lot of work to explain like the UTXO model to someone who knows the Ethereum account model and kind of assumes that everything works like that. But yeah, that was like, we felt like, this is good. Like this is good for Bitcoin. And I mean, that was something that we were always worried about. Like, is what we're doing here, is it good for Bitcoin? Like you said, right? Casey is someone who's been in Bitcoin for a very, very long time and really kind of really tried to make sure with everything in the design that it's like it's strengthening Bitcoin and not something that that it's something that is good for the ecosystem. And so we, everything that was happening, we were kind of looking, okay, so is this playing out like we hope that it's that it's a good thing?
Yeah,
and
but then the storm came, right? Then the storm. Casey, he loves Bitcoin. He thinks it's good for Bitcoin. You guys are thinking it's good for Bitcoin, right? I mean, I'm like you. I'm not quite a maximalist, but I'm Bitcoin mostly. Got into Monero a couple years ago, but that's kind of it. And then Stacks. But I've always been Bitcoin. Sounds like you have a similar thing.
Yeah.
So you go to these maximalist conferences. You love Bitcoin. You think Ordinals is a good thing. Then some of them say no. All of a sudden, Ordinal starts to take off, and then you get this pushback from a lot of people. And I talked to Erin about this, and she was surprised because she's very much a Bitcoiner, and she said that she was surprised, and others were. So clearly, I think we understand like it's good for Bitcoin. I would think most of us would agree with that. And I like that you brought up the scarcity, and you tweeted the other day about Nick Szabo.
Yeah.
And his shelling out by Nick Szabo. So Nick Szabo predates Bitcoin, right? I mean, he's cited in the Bitcoin white paper. So maybe we could talk about that, because this opposition that we got from people really surprised me, because we thought, well, wait, this is digital artifacts. This is gold. This is what Bitcoin
Yeah.
is, right?
This goes way back to and you know this paper you meant, or this article you're mentioning from Nick Szabo is one that when we were talking to Casey, I don't know exactly when it was. I think he, like very early on, like I think at some point last year, like when he talked about his vision for what this is, he mentioned this article to me, and I hadn't read it at that time. So I read it and I thought, oh wow, yeah, this is like, you know, it's like this great, like historical kind of look through the evolution of humanity. And I really liked the, you know, kind of the whole, this idea that the you know, collectibles really served as a tool that distinguished the human species from others and allowed it to kind of have this level of cooperation that distinguishes us from you know, from all the other species, and bringing that into the, and that scarcity is one of the key properties that a collectible requires to be actually, you know, to serve effectively as a collectible. And so I really like that, really resonated with me, because it's not like, you know, I had kind of, you know, I mentioned earlier that I had never really been interested in NFTs. Like that to me felt like, okay, so it's, you know, it's kind of, you know, maybe like a Bitcoin maxi would say, it's like a shitcoin with a JPEG attached, and
yeah, with the JPEG attached, yeah.
yeah.
So, it's a scam.
But yeah, and then, you know, you have rampant speculation and scams and rug pulls and whatever, and you know, that never interested me, and I was kind of, okay, you know, I have learned in between that, you know, that is a very kind of, you know, there's also, you know, a good amount of interesting stuff going on there with like amazing artists and things like that, but it's just drowned out in a lot of noise. And
so for you, so Nick Szabo, shelling out, you were well grounded then in that Bitcoin. So let's take that then to kind of inscriptions. So we could apply Szabo to inscriptions, that these are digital collectibles, artifacts, and even like thinking about how he talked about cryptographic trading cards, right? Yeah. So these aren't, we don't want to say they're NFTs, they're digital collectibles. So let's talk about you and what you inscribe, whatever you're willing to share. Like, can you share any of your first inscriptions? Because to you, it wasn't about, you know, creating these monkey JPEGs and trying to get rich off of them. I imagine, I'd love to hear what your inscriptions were, whatever you can publicly share, either your first ones and anything you're doing now. So, because you understand digital scarcity, you understand value, but you also understand art. So what were your first inscriptions that you can share? And why did you inscribe?
Yeah, I mean, you know, so the interesting thing is, you know, of course, looking back, I'm thinking, well, you know, I should have really prepared something, you know, with a lot of time, like something great to inscribe. And I had like, you know, I was building, you know, helping build this software, but I had never really, before we launched that, thought about inscribing something myself, because I was thinking, you pay a lot of money and it needs to be really valuable if I want to inscribe it. So, and who knows, like, you know, I can always do that later. But then the interesting thing that started is, once, you know, like it started happening really quickly. Like in the early days, I was looking at Ordinals.com like every day, and then you would see, oh, there's a new inscription. Like every second day, there would be a new inscription. Oh, that's interesting. And I was like, in my mind, I was forming, okay, I should really think about what to inscribe. And I think it really started when I saw, you know, the Bitcoin rocks kind of being inscribed. Oh, yeah. Like we saw like 100, like, and at that point I was still thinking like, wow, that's crazy. Like to invest like what was it, like $2 per inscription, 100 times, like $200 on you know, inscribing this. Like that's crazy. And you know, and then so that inspired me to, okay, so I want to create some things of my own. And I had always been like, you know, I'm like, my other passion is AI, and you know, like all this, like I've been like in AI for many years, and kind of playing with all these models, and so from an art perspective, like I'm quite interested in kind of using AI to kind of translate concepts. Like I like creating concepts and then, using AI to kind of translate that into visual representations. So, I think the first inscription I made was actually in the low hundreds. 292 was, kind of picking up this debate of, at that point, like the debate had really become heated on, oh, these, we need to censor these transactions, the illegitimate transactions, and, kind of, Luke Dashier was saying like, oh yeah, but it's like these transactions are lying to your node, and it's like, it was like this very
Lying to your
emotional kind of,
node.
yeah. So,
Yeah. I haven't heard that one. Lying to your node.
no, no,
Okay.
no.
Yeah.
There's a tweet by him, like, or I think he was on a Twitter space where it says like because we're putting something into the witness data, which is meant, for signatures, and what we're putting in there is an actual, signature data. But his point was, no, but it's a lie, because you're not actually like you're making it, you're kind of using it as a Trojan horse to put your data in. So it's a lie. So it needs
Yeah.
to be censored. Like
Okay.
that's
Yeah.
so. And
Yeah.
then, but the interesting thing I found in that debate is that I found that, like, from an intellectual perspective and from what I understood, like the kind of the core tenets of Bitcoin to be, is it's censorship resistant. There is no good or bad in a transaction, right? Like people say, Bitcoin is for enemies. Like if it doesn't work for your enemy, then it's not the system that we want to have. So this whole debate of, oh, these are bad transactions because we don't like them. And I was really quite disappointed with a lot of the takes from people that I had, held in very high regard, and where I felt like they argued from like an emotional point, where they said, oh, I don't like this, so it must be bad. So now I'm kind of construing some argument that if you take it to the extreme, kind of leads you to a point where you damage the actual kind of really important core properties of Bitcoin. So that was kind of, anyway. So I picked up that discussion a bit in my first inscriptions, and then I've since inscribed a few, like I wanted to do stuff that is also not like, I saw a lot of things that were kind of copies of things in other ecosystems, and I thought, well, that's not really it's not really what I want to see here. So let's at least try to create something unique, something that has a unique story. And I started inscribing quite a bit of stuff in the low 100s and then in the 1000s, and it's a fairly wild mix of things. So and I haven't launched a lot yet. It's
Well, can you share anything? Is there anything you can share publicly? Was it art? Was it text files? Was it HTML? Is there anything you can
I
tell
have
us, or do we
art,
need
I
to
have
wait?
text files, I have HTML, I have whatever. I don't know. I think I have an HTML of the first pizza transaction, because Casey was interested. Hey, what are the sets? And then I inscribed the HTML that shows that transaction, things like that. So I have, it's really like a very broad range. And I've just now started, like the last few weeks, kind of starting to kind of launch some of these things, etc. But it's like, that is one of the things I do in Ordinals. I think and I like this aspect, like what I had really underestimated, but it comes also back to this Nick Szabo point, is that building communities based on kind of around collectibles actually is something that can create strong communities. So that's something I had completely underestimated before, and now I see it playing out with kind of the community I've been building around some of my collections, and it's quite a nice experience where you see, wow, okay, so that's how this works. And which reminds me really of this idea in the shutting out paper. Yeah.
So, all right. So you were inscribing early 100s, thousands, and you said you had a variety of inscriptions, some that you, I guess, started to share or come out with. And so it's so interesting that you were working for so long and you underestimated and didn't quite understand kind of the power of inscriptions and digital collectibles. And going back to Nick, he really, he's a great writer and thinker, obviously. And so he kind of probably helped you understand that, and then seeing the adoption, right, and what other people were doing. Definitely. I mean, I'll be honest, I haven't really found an inscription that's sort of my community yet. I'm hoping someone comes up with one, because I see these people going to these different collections and they seem to identify with it so much. And I don't know if I'm gonna have to create one myself, but I'm hoping that there will be one this year. So you're so deep in the code with GitHub, you're working so hard on it. What can you share about right now? I know you have the Ordinally and Friends. Is there anything you want to say about that, what you guys are doing?
Yeah, so that's kind of the other, and that's maybe a little bit also to your comment, where I've inscribed my own things, but what I really want to see, and kind of what also the vision that excited me about what Casey wanted to build here was, like, one of the reasons he had said was like, I was looking for something to launch my own art, and I didn't find it on Ethereum. So that's kind of one of the things that brought him here. And then this vision he had of, like, having, kind of technical people and artists kind of collaborate on using this new medium that first can kind of serve as a canvas for, like, a very durable medium to store and preserve and present and kind of exhibit your art. And so kind of the vision that I have with the Ordinally and Friends is to really help artists to come into this ecosystem. So I started with an actual friend of mine, who's an artist, and who I was telling about what I was doing, and then he immediately got it when I kind of explained, like, and what distinguishes this from all the NFTs you have seen is that you actually have your art kind of preserved for, if you're optimistic about Bitcoin, for eternity.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of, we said, okay, that makes sense. And it's like putting it on a canvas that has this really long-term durability. And so we started doing some collections, and then I thought, this is a lot of fun, like, kind of sitting down with an artist, and kind of brainstorming, like, I think the combination of kind of trying to do interesting technical things and interesting art, and kind of that gets interesting. So since I've worked with a few other artists, and kind of we're advising and helping artists, and to how can you use this canvas in a way that makes sense? Because, like, my personal kind of thing is, like, I'd like to see more and better art on Ordinals, and let's help make that happen.
Yeah, I love art, but I'm a snob with art. I like mostly art pre-World War One. I'm not a modern art guy. I know that makes me unpopular, especially in Ordinals, but I would love to see art elevated a little more. Maybe it doesn't have to be.
But that's like that's the interesting thing. Like, it's always, like, art is always, I think, very subjective, and I think everybody has to, like, I love the diversity we're seeing and the experimentation. I think especially, like, the experimentation we have unleashed now with recursion, where people are starting to, I'm also, like, I really love photography, and if you kind of, whatever, if I shoot images with my 50 megapixel camera, those are not great files for putting on Ordinals, right? With, like, you have a 400 kilobyte restriction, kind of, unless you work with a miner. But now, you see some creative ways where people, like, I like what Billy Resley did with his 6 megabyte inscription, that they used recursion to kind of essentially put that into different pieces and then assemble it together. That's a nice concept. I love the experimentation, but I think, like, we're still so early, and I think there is a lot more room for great stuff to come onto Ordinals, and kind of have there be something for, for kind of, a wide range of tastes.
Yeah, it's permissionless. So we're
Yeah,
going to get a
exactly.
lot of great stuff and a
Exactly.
lot
Yeah.
of not so great
A
stuff.
lot of stuff
Exactly.
that, not, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
And I'm with you. I love the inscriptions that are, I think, aesthetically pleasing, but do something with the technology. Like you mentioned, Bill Wrestley's, that was very cool. I also like things, to me, it's like the triangle is technically interesting, aesthetically pleasing, but something based in Bitcoin. I really like when there's something that references Bitcoin in some way. Those are just my favorite. I mean, we don't want to be constrained by Bitcoin thought and culture,
No,
but
and
I
I
do
think
like those.
there is a lot of potential there. And I think like if you look at like what I really like is looking at all these different layers, right? You can think about the Satoshi that you inscribe, that's kind of your canvas, and then you have all this storytelling about whatever rare Satoshis of a certain kind, but you have the Satoshi numbers, you have the Satoshi names, and people are getting more and more into like ideas. Maybe I can find Satoshis that contain the name of my project, right? Or, maybe I can find Satoshis from my birthday or, whatever, right? So,
Yeah.
so something that is meaningful and like what I really like, it's kind of boring if everybody does the same and everybody takes whatever block 78 sets and now it's something special. No, I think what is interesting is if you're conscious about what you choose, right? Like an artist, like he chooses the canvas, the colors, like every piece of it. It's careful, kind of conscious selection. And I think you can do the same thing here on Bitcoin. And I think there is now with recursion, there's also a lot more potential, especially with generative art, where you can reference things like, block height. And, we will be adding more recursive endpoints where you can, kind of my view would be that making as much as possible of the state and kind of, the state of the Bitcoin network available to inscriptions, like opens a lot of interesting possibilities where you can have inscriptions kind of react to what's going on Bitcoin, right? Like you can use it as a source of randomness, but you can use it. I like this idea that a few people have floated on, you can do whatever reveals at a certain time when you kind of reference an inscription that is not there yet, or you can reference a certain Satoshi and then reinscribe that and so have kind of controlled state change of inscription. So like there's a lot of things where you can make an inscription kind of a living entity on the Bitcoin network that has access to the state of the Bitcoin network.
Yes.
I'm not really thinking like Bitcoin will become like this fully programmable thing. I think some people are very excited about, suddenly you can do everything you can do on ETH on Bitcoin because of inscriptions. I don't believe that's true. But there's certainly room to do interesting things. But you also need to understand kind of the limitations. I think this is not making Bitcoin into Ethereum by no means.
But so much of this is because of the limitations of Bitcoin, right?
Yeah.
And it's you face these constraints. But you've said canvas a few times, and I think that's the right word. And especially you also brought up the different sats that you inscribe on. And so when you bring up canvas, it's same with art. Well, it's not just oil painting. It's not just, right. You could use marble, you could use wood, you could use stone. And Bitcoin and Ordinals allows you to use different ones. Is it a common set? Is it uncommon? So you can pick certain ones. And then you brought up numbers. Is it a birthday? Is it the pizza day? Whatever it is. So it's really dynamic in the sense that it's not just the data, but where you put the data, on what kind of Satoshi do you put that? And now with, you were talking about being able to do things that reference back to each other. So this is like so amazing. Part of it is just Bitcoin's design by accident has produced these results. And then the fact that Bitcoin is the first, Bitcoin, so it's been around long enough that enough history has happened that you can do certain things and refer to certain date and certain Satoshi. So it's actually quite much more dynamic than anything else, and not really on purpose in a way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think also like what I really liked seeing also is like, I think if you were to do like a systematic evaluation of Twitter timelines, like I think the amount of screenshots from mempool.space that have kind of come up, like where people show this kind of mempool art, that's another layer, right? You can very carefully craft your transactions so they you have these interesting these interesting looking transactions for the inscriptions to establish provenance, or I think one thing that I like about is like, okay, it actually helps people understand how this stuff works behind the scenes, and people now actually care about the mempool and care about the transactions, and start understanding this more deeply. um, but I think like it opens interesting layers for art, like like you said, like the you have the satoshis as your canvas, you have the way you inscribe with what transactions you use, what UTXOs you use to inscribe. You have all these techniques of recursion, where you can reference other things, and so it's an interesting toolbox, but it's also a toolbox that is it's constrained to what's on Bitcoin, right? It's not like, it's like the core tenet always is like, in the end, everything you have there is on chain, and it's not referencing anything outside that. So it's you have this guarantee that it's it actually lives on Bitcoin.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity for immutability, durability,
Yeah.
but also expression. I mean, I'd love to know if Nick has been inscribing, Nick Szabo, right? I mean, I would love to get him on the podcast and see,
Well,
hey, what do you,
that would be amazing.
could you imagine?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That would be amazing. Yeah, you should really try that. Like that.
I don't think he's going to come on. I think he's kind of keeping to himself these last couple of years, but that would be amazing. Well, we're just about out of time, Ordinally, but I do want to ask you one final question that I think might summarize everything. And I like to ask this to the guests that usually has some good answers. So here's my last and final question to you. Do you have any inscriptions that you would never sell or transfer? And if so, what are they and why?
That's an interesting one. So, I think the one, like, it's actually interesting. So there's quite a few that I wouldn't sell, but the first one that came to mind actually was one that I think it was the first one that I actually paid money for, is it's actually my zodiac sign, from the Aquarian Conspiracy series, which, like, it's from a very small collection of 12 inscriptions, and it's obviously very personal, since it's my sign, and it's also associated with that event in May in Miami. So that's the first one that comes to mind, but there's a few more. But it's like, I really liked, like, because that also, it's associated with a community of people who have, like, a very, a very interesting view on Bitcoin, and like mind-opening view, let's say, on Bitcoin. So that's the one I would pick.
That's a good one. And you bought it. So it's a community, it's personal to you, it's a point in time. And I'm sure there's others, but that's more of a personal question. So that was a great answer. I knew you'd have a good one. So that's great. And we just talked to Erin. She's going to be the first one that we publish here. Ordinal, I really appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on the podcast. I think we covered a lot of topics. We got insight into kind of the earlier days. We got insight into what happened when things kind of blew up. We talked about art. We talked about Nick Szabo and collectibles. Any final messages where people could maybe find you on Twitter and your future work really quick?
Yeah, so find me on Twitter at very Ordinally, and you can find kind of links to everything else from there. Meet me in person in Amsterdam on October 14th. We're doing a conference, Inscribing Amsterdam. So that's something that I'm excited about. kind of like, in the future, like we have a lot of plans for the open source protocol, and that's why I hope the next few months I can, we just had some planning sessions on our roadmap. So, we have a good list of things to ship in the next few months.
Exciting. Well, again, Ordinal, thanks for coming on the Ordinals podcast. And everyone, please check out his Twitter and then Inscribe Amsterdam, and you can meet him there. Thank you very much.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please rate and review our show. Subscribe to the Ordinals podcast on Spotify, iTunes, or your favorite app, and follow us on Twitter at @theordpod. Drop us a line at podcast@ord.media for topics you'd like us to cover or guests you'd like us to interview. Ordinals 2024 conference is taking place in Nashville. Early bird passes are available now. Visit ord.media and sign up for our newsletter. Thanks for listening to the Ordinals podcast, produced by Ord Media.